Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, based on which time zone that you are in. My name is Nuzhath Ayaz. I'm the founder of the brand Unleash, and we specialize in consulting globally and virtually in the area of learning and development, coaching, and organizational cultures. I'm really pleased to invite my childhood friend on the show today. A little bit about her before I invite her. Her name is Dr. Sharon Jacob, and I'm really proud of what she's achieved today. If I think back to school days, she's always been someone who's challenged the status quo and she's always gone against the grain. And that's why she's creating an impact for herself, her students, and her community with the work that she does. So let's go ahead without any more delay and hear straight from Sharon Jacob about her thoughts about a topic that we're going to discuss today, which is going to be diversity, equity, and inclusion. So Sharon, welcome. It's such a pleasure to have you on our webinar today. And it's really, really awesome to see you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nuzi. And I'm so honored to be on this platform. And I'm so proud to see the work you are doing with Unleash and the way you are talking about training. I'm super excited to be on this platform. And I think it's our mutual love for wanting to create spaces that talk about equality, diversity, and inclusion. That actually, we started putting our heads together and decided that we need to have this conversation and bring out elements that you do in your work with Unleash, training leaders, and I do in my work as a professor and as an intellectual. So I'm very proud and excited to be here. And thank you for such a wonderful introduction and basically calling me a troublemaker.
Yes, we need more troublemakers, don't we, Sharon? But yes, on that note, if I may just share with the viewers, what's the kind of trouble that Sharon creates? She does a lot of work in the area of gender, race, ethnicity, sexuality, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that's why, as you might know, all of these topics are not easy to approach, they're not easy to address. And it's an evolving journey, a learning journey that all of us need to go through. So while we don't have perfect answers, both Sharon and I would like to make a humble attempt today to present to you some of our perspectives, viewpoints, and ideas around these topics. And we'll be very happy to work with your organizations to create an impact within your organizations in partnership with your leaders and your HR leaders. So Sharon, let's get started off. So diversity, what's fascinating is that you kept mentioning the word equity as we spoke about diversity, right? So we speak a lot about diversity and inclusion in India, but diversity, equity, and inclusion is not a very common topic that we have explored. So I would like you to share with our viewers, what are your thoughts on that? How are these, three different words related? And also to share with us, is it the same? So diverse and inclusive, are these two different terms?
Yeah.
Are they similar?
Yeah, or are they interchangeable, right? Which is usually how we see it. And to be fair, I think even in the US context, while diversity, equity, and inclusion is a more relevant term because it encapsulates inclusion at its core. But it's still not used as widely. It's still gaining ground. So let me start, as I would with just talking about diversity and inclusion, and then I will talk about equity, because that's the more relevant and familiar term. We all use it. We all want to be part of cultures and organizations and work atmospheres that are diverse and that are inclusive. But we often use them interchangeably. So very often we are under this notion that diversity and inclusion are synonymous. So if I'm diverse, that means I am inclusive. But I think we need to
Yes.
tease out the meanings of both these words, because you may be part of a company or an organization, and we usually are in parts of environments, work environments that are pretty diverse in terms of their gender makeup, in terms of their racial and ethnic makeup, in terms of age, in terms of abilities, in terms of sexualities, in terms of all kinds of diversities. But we really need to ask ourselves the question: just because we have all these diversities in and around us, in our work environments, are we really inclusive? And they don't necessarily have to be synonymous. You can be part of a company or an organization that is diverse, but not necessarily inclusive, which means
So true. Yeah.
what are we doing to make the people who come from various backgrounds, who come from different life experiences, who come from different body types, who come from different ages, feel inclusive and feel like they are part of the company culture that they
Mhm.
are working in? How are
Right.
we making that work atmosphere
Right.
inclusive to them? So that's
Yes.
diversity and that's inclusion. So now let's come to equity and why equity
Mhm.
matters. So you could be diverse, right? You could be inclusive. You could promote a safe and inclusive and enhancing organization culture. But does that mean that all your employees are able to access the resources that you are giving them as an organization equally? Are you creating trajectory paths for them that ensures their growth and ensures them thriving in your
Mhm.
organization, not merely surviving?
Right.
We often, I think, even as employees, we often go and work in organizations where we're focused on surviving, not thriving. And thriving
Mhm.
is very important for us, I think, as employees also, because it is not just about our success. Along with our success, it's also tied into the success of the company and the organization. And I think,
Absolutely.
yeah, and I
Yeah.
think organization has to ensure diversity, equity, and inclusion for all of its employees in order that they can be in this relational they can build this relational culture
Yes.
where the success of the employee is also the success of the organization and vice versa. So
That's so amazing. Yeah.
sorry for being long winded and giving you
No,
like
that's
three
fine.
part
It's
part.
perfect.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
I think we need to look at all these three, not as synonymous, but
Mhm.
as three terms: diversity, equity, and inclusion, working to enhance the organization and working to enhance the experience of the employee in the organization.
That is so important. And thank you so much for helping us understand how diversity is different from inclusion. I remember when we were having a discussion about diversity inclusion to start with, and then we also said we're going to address the aspect of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then we said that just because you're diverse doesn't mean you're inclusive. We explored this theme quite in depth to bring forth the idea that yes, a lot of times we might think we're doing the correct thing, but fact of the matter is just because we have a diverse culture and employees does not mean each employee is feeling included. And now, of course, you want to make sure that employees also feel that they have equal opportunities. And that's a fabulous way to approach. Just imagine, I would be really delighted to work in an organization like that. And Sharon, I'm sure you agree with me, there's a lot of research that supports the fact that organizations which are diverse and they welcome various perspectives are also the ones who are incidentally more successful, don't you think?
Yes, of course, right? Because there is this the idea that if you have a company and it's homogeneous, that, you know, all your employees are reflecting back the same experiences and the voice of the organization, then there's an issue, there's a problem, right?
Yes.
But if you are part of an organization that is diverse, that is that allows sorry, not, I think allows is the wrong word, that incorporates and man,
Yeah,
the
that's
right
fine.
the
Yes, I
right
go what you're
word is
saying.
yeah,
That's
there's
absolutely fine. Yeah.
encourages, that encourages, right, that
Encourages.
incorporates
Yes.
and encourages different points of view, different life experiences, different different forms of diversity. Those
Yes.
kinds of companies are, you know, they are not only wonderful to be in be a part of, but they
Mhm.
are also the ones that will survive longer, because they
Absolutely.
are changing with the times of the world, right? They're changing with the
Wow.
way the world is
Yes.
changing. So
Right.
you have to be, I think, as a leader, you have to be not just someone who leads ethically, but you need to
Mhm.
also be someone who is a dynamic leader and is willing to constantly change and
Mhm.
evolve in your leadership strategies and your skills and the way you're leading your team, and making sure that your leadership is current, right?
That's fabulous.
I
Yeah.
cannot, you know, so just to give you an example, I cannot, I cannot lead the class that I'm leading today in
Mm,
2020
mm,
in the midst
mm.
of a pandemic in the same way that I did even last year, right? My
Yes,
leadership skills
absolutely.
has to always evolve and change. So
Right.
also with the way in which we're including diversity, equity, and
I
inclusion.
love that. I love that. I love that for the fact that we're talking about evolving, we're talking about changing, which means that that brings me to the point that right now, while there are many organizations taking the diversity approach, the inclusion approach, yet there seems to be a communication gap in
Yeah.
implementation, in making sure that the dreams are really achieved, isn't it? So I guess your point actually points towards the direction that while we are doing all of this, why is there still a gap? Maybe it requires us to do more depth work. Maybe it requires us to look at everything in a very different light. Maybe there's something more that needs to be done and differently in
Yeah.
order for us to bring that kind of an impact within our organizations.
Right,
So, do you
right.
think you want to share with our viewers what are some of the approaches organizations can and leaders can take towards a more inclusive, diverse, and equity oriented organization?
Right. So how do you get, and I think one of the things you said, Nuzia, and I so agree with that, there is a communication gap, right? What are you doing in terms of communicating to your employees when it comes to the vision of your company? How are you
Right.
communicating those visions? Are you communicating it effectively? And you just don't communicate, you also have to make sure that your company, your team, your employees are tapping in and invested in that vision. So
Right.
so this is a teamwork, this is something that does not happen in silos. I think that's number one. Number
Yes.
two is, how aware are you of the conversations on diversity, equity, and inclusion? How aware are you of your own biases?
Hmm. Hmm.
You need to be someone who is aware of the ways in which biases, conscious and unconscious, affect the way in which you lead your team. Or are you making
Yeah,
your team feel inclusive? That's one.
that's true.
And
Right.
the other thing I would say is, simple things like hiring practices. What kind of hiring practices are you engaging in?
Hmm.
Recognizing that even as, if you are an HR person, that you have biases, that when you read a resume, right,
Right.
that you are creating stereotypes, and being vigilant and being self-aware of the stereotypes that we are creating. And so things like that. I would also say, outcomes, this is something that you talk about a lot. in your
Yeah.
own work of, having goal-oriented outcomes,
Yes.
what kind of a, reflect with your company, reflect with your employees, what kind of a company do you want to be, reflect with your team. Sometimes it doesn't have to be, an all employee organizational meeting. Sometimes it can be, good leadership practices in your own teams that you're leading, your small teams. What kind
Mm.
of a leader do you want to be? What kind of outcomes do you want to get with your team? So,
Mm.
small
Yes.
small and incremental steps can now shape the larger culture of the organization. And I'm sure
I really like that. Yeah.
you have ideas on this too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I remember when we discussed about these things, we said that what is the best way for us to approach an organization, and we spoke about ethical leadership
Hmm.
to start with. You shared with me that, and we both discussed how ethical leadership, when you have your heart and your head in the same, direction in terms of the vision for the organization. And one of the things which I feel could actually work, since we work with organizational cultures and developing people and as well as leadership, is milestone measurements. Like if you want to really define the vision and then say every 6 months or every 3 months, this is what will measure what we have really achieved as
Hmm.
an organization. So milestone measurements could work beautifully for an organization. And then that brings me to the idea of the topic that you shared with me, Sharon, which is, of course, a really happening topic today, design thinking. You want to like quickly just share a line or two with the viewers, because our next series
Yes.
of recordings is going to actually have webinars, is going to actually have more information about design thinking, but just a little bit right now so they get an idea, which will encourage them to incorporate the idea into their thinking pattern.
Right. So just to give you a little bit of a backstory to your viewers about how I, as a professor who teaches on gender, sexuality, religion, race, ethnicity, came into, using design thinking, and I use it also in my own classes and the way I teach my students.
Fabulous.
So, I think it was about maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I actually attended a workshop on design thinking. And that introduced me to this, very, very iterative process. And I'll just leave you all with the definition of what design thinking is. It's this process in which we are trying to understand the customer, right? And also challenge assumptions and redefine problems. Very often as leaders, we have prototypes, we have models of how we lead, and we keep rinsing and repeating the same models, just the context changes. But the truth of the matter is, with every context, your leadership style needs to change and evolve, right? So redefining the
Right.
problems, coming up with alternative strategies and solutions that may not be apparent the minute you walk into a customer's site, or even if we were to talk about it in terms of diversity and inclusion, these solutions may not be apparent when we're talking about diversity and inclusion, equity and inclusion, and enhancing our organizational culture. But design thinking helps us think outside the box, thinks about creating, creative solutions to talk about issues surrounding diversity, equity, and inclusion, or as we would call it, DEI.
Yeah, fabulous. I think all of that fits in, and the timing is really perfect because I think the world is moving in the direction of diversity, equity, and inclusion, because everybody wants to make sure that we are fair. We want to make sure that humanity is respected, and we want to make sure that we're doing the right leadership approach with good leadership ethics.
Yeah.
And that's what
And
this is all
can I
about.
just add one more
Yes,
thing to what you said,
yes,
Nuzi? Because I think this is so important. It's not just about being part of a company that is, that believes in fundamentals such as diversity, equity, and inclusion of all individuals. But
Right.
it also, I think, as a company, it really helps with things like, a fast turnover rate. How do you keep your employees invested in your vision if they don't feel welcomed and they don't feel like they are part of this organization and its culture? They don't feel like they're part of the values in which you, as your organization or your corporation or your institution, because this affects even educational institutions, is not promoting, right? So it helps with things like keeping, keeping, what do you say, the investment energy up of employees,
Right. Yeah.
and wanting to be part of this organization. Yeah.
Again, once again, I totally agree with you that it's a lot about, aligning ourselves to the idea in a holistic manner and making sure that we, give that outcome for each and every stakeholder involved, right? So whether it's an employee, whether it's a leader, whether it's an organization, it's an investor, we want to make sure that diversity, equity, and inclusion is creating those positive ripples across and creating a systems impact. So to our viewers, in conclusion, and thank you very much, Sharon, before we go away, for that wonderful, insight about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And thank you, my personal thank you note for bringing me up to speed to understand the aspect of equity and how that works in organization. So to our viewers, you're most welcome to connect with us. This webinar comes to you by Unleash, which is a consulting, learning, and coaching brand. We'll be very happy to have our thought leaders to consult with you and design a strategic solution for your organizations. And do look out for our upcoming webinar, which is going to be a little more in-depth information about design thinking. So thank you very much and have a great evening. Sharon, you have a good morning and great day, because it's your morning right now.
Yes, and a good night to you. Right there.
Thank you so much.
Yes,
You too. Bye, Sharon.
It was wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure.